Um,
I think it's still.
do you think we just... Yeah, okay. We're going to have to share a mic. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
And congratulations on this epic book. I think from conversations I've had with you, it was epic in every way. Maybe when did you first come up with the idea for this book and start working on it?
Thank you, David. Yeah, it's wonderful to see everyone here as well. So thank you for all attending tonight in this beautiful space. I guess the original idea for the book emerged when I was looking at one of Glenn's books, which was published in about 1997. It was a book by Francois Fromenot. It was a beautiful book, and it had many of his finished works, many of his kind of well-known projects. But there were a couple of projects in there which were unbuilt. There was a plan for a house in southern Victoria, the Summers House, and there was a remarkable and absolutely beautiful plan for a project up on the Central Coast at Mount White. And that's all there was in the book, and they were absolutely intriguing. And so they were kind of always in my mind as being kind of interesting projects that were never realised, and I always wondered what they would look like. So I kind of parked that in the back of my head. So fast forward to about 5 years ago, and I'm at Anabu Furniture in Redfern, and it's a furniture launch for the new USM furniture, which we just bought for our office. And Glenn happened to be there, and I hadn't seen him for a while, and it was lovely. It was, "Oh, Glenn, haven't seen you for ages, how are you?" And we got chatting, and we actually went and sat down on some beautiful alto furniture and had a chat about, life, the universe and everything. And I was asking, "Are there any more books coming out about your projects?" And Glenn answered, "No, I don't think there's anything on the horizon. There's a couple of little things, but nothing really to speak of." And out of nowhere I said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great to do a book about your unbuilt projects?" And that's obviously kind of an echo of me remembering those images from 97. And Glenn was like, "Oh, that could be kind of interesting." And I thought, yeah, that's the kind of book I would like to read. I wonder who would write that book. Wouldn't it be fantastic if someone could write that book about his unbuilt projects? And then the next day I thought, oh my God, that person could be me. I could actually do that myself, couldn't I? So I wrote to Glenn a nice kind of analogue letter, actually kind of written and posted and sent, saying, "Glenn, look, I've been reflecting on that conversation we had last night. Would you be interested in doing a book about your unbuilt projects?" And I think about a week went past. And he wrote back the most beautiful letter, and I've kept it, it's a beautiful letter, saying, look, he doesn't normally want to kind of promote books. He's not a self-promoter. He doesn't necessarily seek publications. But if I was interested and if I was able to do the project, then he would give me as much time and support as he could afford. And then he presented a list of potential projects which might be of interest. And really the conversation, it kind of started from there.
It's funny you should mention analogue. Many years ago, not that many years ago, I wanted to send Glenn something and I asked if we could have his email address and he just said, email. But Glenn is famously very analogue. He is someone who pretty much works on his own. He still draws by hand. I think he's even said that digital technology or computer-aided drafting is the enemy of design or words to that effect. We're looking at some images here on the screen tonight, and it's hard to believe that they're not photographs of real buildings. They're computer-generated images. How did you make that leap from convincing someone who is famously analog to delving into something that is the cutting edge of digital technology in a way?
Just as an aside, I showed my sister the book, and it's got very clearly written on the front cover, Unbuilt Works, right? And she said, oh, this is fantastic. These are really beautiful projects. So where are they? Can I go and visit one? Oh, my God, Sally, it says Unbuilt Works. These are CGI views. So she was and she was fooled. And these images here are a really great example of them. I think they're all in order according to the book, but they do look very real. So Glenn took some convincing, really. And I think he was sort of, as you say, he's not a fan of computers because I think he feels, as do I, that sometimes computers can kind of take control of things a little bit and they start to kind of impose themselves on the design process. Because computers want numbers, they want angles, they want data, they want materials, they want, you've got to constantly make very hard, real decisions. Whereas the way Glenn works is a lot more, as I say, analog. It's a lot more drawing. It's thinking through things. And just going through his drawings is a really remarkable experience. I'll give you an example of what that's like. So his collection's held at the State Library of New South Wales. And there would be, I think I counted 360 projects. And I think he's added another 40 to that. So it's approximately 400 projects. And each one of them is put into a giant manila folder, which is kind of double AO size. And so you go to the library and you check out kind of the, the information, the database. And you go, oh, that project looks good, that looks good. You fill out your little slip and your little form, and it kind of goes to the librarians. And they say, well, come back in 20 minutes. And so you go to the little coffee shop and maybe have a pastry or something. And then you come back and there's a trolley, a stainless steel trolley with this sort of half-round shape and this huge folders inside. And they bring the folder out, put it on the big table, and you kind of go, okay, here we go, this is fantastic, I can't believe I'm about to do this. You kind of open the folder and you almost have to walk from one side to the other to open this thing up. And usually on the top there's a little folder full of correspondence, faxes, emails, maybe some product literature, a letter from council, so you put that to one side. And then there's a big, chunky, thick wad of hand-drawn sketches. And they start with the most tentative pencil sketches, trying to understand the site, sort of drawing contours, trying to kind of feel what the project wants, and trying to respond, I guess, to the unique aspects that every single site and every brief has. And you kind of flick through the drawings, and an idea starts to emerge, maybe about a third of the way down, and you think, okay, he's onto something here. You can sort of start to see a diagram arrive. And then he'll probably head off and do some drawings of the brief requirements, like bedrooms and sizes, and just sort of work things out. And then that starts to get overlaid on the idea, and it's all very analog. It's still thinking, it's just the mind to the hand the whole time. And after a while, then the grids start to arrive. And every project has a different grid. And a grid is a way of organising a project, usually numerically. And it's kind of about 1 metre or 1.2 metres or 900 millimetres or something like that. And that grid is the master set out across the whole project that things like walls and roofs and purlins and everything lines up with. And every project has a slightly different number because of different reasons. And then you get to the bottom of the folder, and that's where the working drawings are. And that's where all of these ideas are then consolidated into a beautiful set of plans, sections, elevations and details, all drawn by hand with ink on film, with notes, copious notes everywhere, beautifully drawn. The drafting is exquisite, usually drawn with a .25 Rotring pen, so it's super, super fine for the architects out there. And that's kind of the golden nugget at the bottom of it. And that's what we use then to create the models. So to answer your question, I think Glenn doesn't really understand computers actually, I think at the heart of it, because he's from a different generation. He didn't grow up with it, doesn't understand it. So I think he was kind of nervous about what the computers would do. But as the projects emerged, we reached a point where our software kind of reached its limits, and the images we were getting were kind of okay, but not okay. And there was a particular moment where I said to Glenn, look, I really think we need to go next level here. And that's when we contacted a wonderful CGI artist called David Meagher, and he lives actually not far from here, he just lives in Brazil. And he created these from the models that we created. And he added that level of realism, which I think even astounded me, and I'm a kind of a computer guy. And so Glenn was just totally knocked for six. And then he started fiddling with them. He couldn't help himself. So I was like, oh, could you just notice the roof edge there? I wouldn't normally do that these days. So if you could just, maybe if the purlin could taper like this, and this is all happening via text message, by the way. So he's more than happy to use kind of mobile telephones. And so sketches start arriving, and then little diagrams, and then you know, a couple of days later, look, I've been thinking about the furniture. I really want to use this particular type of chair. Could you use that one, the one with the glass top, not the one with the solid top? And then ping, 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 images from, you know, the internet get sending through. So I think he embraced it after a while, and suddenly he got very excited about the possibilities of seeing what he kind of knew all along. And the other thing he said, there were no surprises. When he saw these images, they were exactly as he had imagined it. So he said, there were no surprises for me. This is what I thought we were going to get, and so it really confirmed it. But for everybody else, it was like, wow, these are phenomenal. So yeah, it was a bit of a learning journey. I'd like to ask him that now, actually. How do you feel about computers? We'll see.
Well, he's a man in his 80s who is still working, so maybe he will have a late in life conversion to computer technology. In selecting, there are 10 projects featured in the book. Just because we're sharing a microphone, I'll ask you a two-part question.
Yeah.
How many unbuilt projects are there in Glenn's archive? If you could give us a little bit of a sense of that. And how did you sift through those, and what was the process in deciding which projects to feature? Was it a case of having something from every sort of decade of his working life, or was there some other kind of process for selecting the various projects?
I think of the 400 projects that Glenn had filed away at the State Library, I estimated that somewhere between maybe 40 or 50 of them hadn't been built, they were unbuilt, which represents what, 10-15% of his projects were unbuilt, which is remarkable because for any normal architect, that's inversed. I mean, I've checked my list of projects. I'd be lucky if 10% of the projects I've worked on have ever been built, because that's just life. You know, things change, circumstances change, and there are kind of design competitions, there are proposals, there are DAs, clients change their minds, they want a feasibility study. But for Glenn, his hit rate is remarkable. So to have 10%, 10 to 15% unbuilt, I mean, that's just staggeringly impressive. And I think the reason that he's able to achieve that is because he's a one-man band and he works all by himself. He's worked with assistants in the past, and I certainly helped him, and he's worked with others in collaboration. But on the whole, he's not beholden to business partners or staff, so he doesn't kind of have to feed the beast. So he can do things at his own kind of timing. And he's mentioned in the past that he realised he could stretch time. That's the one resource he could kind of stretch, because he could say to clients, look, I would love to do this project for you. It's a wonderful site. I'd be delighted, I'd be honoured to do this job, but I can't start for another 3 years. I have too many current commitments, but if you can wait, then by all means we can do this project and I'd be delighted. But the soonest I can start is in 3 years' time. And what that really did was really start to sort the men from the boys, or you kind of sort of the goats from the sheep. And so if clients, I think, were willing to wait and they were willing to value his work, then the chances of the projects going ahead was much higher as a consequence. So it kind of folded into itself as being kind of a benefit of his methods of working. So that was kind of I guess the number that weren't built in his collection. But when it comes to choosing the projects, that was really hard, because there were, as I say, about 40 projects that we could have chosen. I was always going to choose those two I saw in that book, the one in Summers and the one up at Mount White. That was like, that's a given. And in fact, I started with those two at the beginning because I was just so keen. And then we had a bit of a long list, and I think we got to about 20. There were some projects where Glenn's like, no, don't do that one. No, don't do that one. No, I really didn't like the client on that one. It was terrible. Don't do that one. So we got down to about 20. And that was the hard part, because I would love to have done all 20, but really 10, I think, was the limit of my capability. And so every project really has a reason why it was chosen. I'll give you an example. The first project in the book, which is the house for his mother, that's kind of his very, very first project, when he first went out by himself in 1969. And a lot of architects do a house for their mother as their first project. And this was on a beautiful site in Clontarf. And it was the rolling images at the beginning of this sequence, which will, you can have a look at the book actually. A very simple building. And he did 3 schemes for that site. And one of them is actually a model at the Powerhouse Museum. And Glenn said, don't do that one, because I actually think this one was better, because it started to explore some themes that evolved over the course of my career. There were little clues in there which I can recognise now, what I was trying to do. So I thought, okay, cool, that sounds like a good one. And by that I mean the little angled windows and the way that the roof just sort of kicks up at the edges, just some little details that were starting to promise an approach or a way of designing. The other house, which was quite nice, that was the sort of the vaulted steel one, which you saw earlier. He did that with his son Nick, when Nick was a young student, and I think there's some sentiment there. And Nick passed away, I think maybe 12 or 14 years ago, very sadly. He died of cancer, but he was a wonderful architect. And I think Glenn I guess there's some sentiment in that project, so he was quite keen to do that one. Another project which was interesting was, Glenn's famous for saying he's been to the Land and Environment Court 11 times to fight for his cases and to fight these difficult councils to get these things approved. And out of those 11 trips to the Land and Environment Court, he's won 10 of them, and he's very proud of that. So I thought, okay, I've got to do the 11th, right? So the one that didn't get approved, and that was the one in Linfield, which was the one with the courtyard, the very white house, which has the kind of the courtyard spaces. And that was really interesting, because that was a very close cousin to the house he did for Ken Doan in Mossman. Again, an inward-looking courtyard house, very defensive but very beautiful, which I think was really inspired by the time he spent in Mykonos as a young man, as a young architect. At the other end of the scale, I was also very keen to do the very, very big hotel project he did at Moonlight Head on the south coast of Victoria, which would have been by far Glenn's biggest project. He did that in association with Wendy Lewin, and he had the Georgiadis brothers who assisted. And that was a huge project. And I was very interested to see how the way that Glenn has sort of designed houses, how that would translate into much larger projects. So that was a fascinating project. That's the last chapter in the book as well, if you have a look at the end. It was a very big project. It was mostly brickwork. It was very inspired by some Swedish architects' sort of brickwork sort of projects. And then in the middle there's the Silver City Mining Museum, which has been well published, another unbuilt job. That's the project in the middle of the outback, which utilises kind of the Middle Eastern Malkaf wind catchers to draw air in through the building and take it across water to cool it. So that was an interesting project. And I guess the other ones, they had their reasons as well, but they're the ones that really stand out.
Given what you said about the way Glenn works and the patience that potential clients need to have if they want to engage him and so on, why were some of these, or why were there so many unbuilt projects? It would then perhaps logically think, or lead one to think that he would have almost no unbuilt projects except for things that are refused by council, which famously has been one project. Were there any other reasons that Glenn shared with you as to why something wasn't something other than just the client ran out of money? Were there some reasons why some projects weren't built? And did Glenn have kind of regrets that they weren't built? And was that a process of him thinking, well, I can finally get to see what this would look like?
It's a really good question actually, David, because that's the first thing Glenn said to me, so started the book, yep, let's do the book. Glenn, I want to interview you, let's catch up. So I went to his place in Mossman, we sat down on the couch and I kind of rode in the tape recorder. And he said, now, the first thing we should talk about is why some of these projects weren't built, because people will want to know. And so, in his mind, that was kind of the first thing that needed to be explained. Why weren't these projects done? And the reason was, there were many reasons. Circumstances change, people change their minds. If you've got 3 years and then a year of design development, maybe people realise they don't want to do the house. Sometimes it's inflation, so on a couple of projects, the projects were designed and then inflation took off over the period of the design kind of reaching tender, and the prices came back far in excess of what they'd imagined, and the clients just simply couldn't afford it. Other clients, I think the house in Burrell Lake, it was for a lovely kind of, as Glenn described them, a perfectly normal average couple. I think he was a teacher, or she was a teacher. No, he was a teacher and she was a cleaner. And they did the design for the project, and sadly she got breast cancer and passed away. So the husband said, I couldn't possibly live in a house like this by myself. It was done for my family, done for my wife and I, so that was abandoned. And other projects were like really boring, prosaic stuff, like the one up in Lightning Ridge, which is the community centre. Glenn was commissioned to do a concept design for that one, and there weren't many drawings, so we had to sort of fill in the gaps on that one. But then the council said, oh look, you need to re-tender for the next stage of the project, because that's our process. Because your fee was in excess of the minimum that we can do without a tender. So Glenn's like, but I've done all the design work. So they said, well, you've got to re-tender it up against somebody else. We've got to do a competitive system, and that's kind of the probity system we have at council. So he lodged his fees, and his fee was too high. So that was it. The project was finished, it was abandoned, it was never built, and now something else has been built in that location instead. So yeah, the reasons are many and varied, and kind of unpredictable, I guess. And like anyone, yeah, the circumstances are very different over the course of a project. So yeah, I think ultimately though, he's done very well to get the projects he has built done to the level of quality that he's been able to achieve. But yeah, those are the main reasons.
Now you mentioned that there was a temptation for Glenn to redesign projects as the process was going. I'm wondering if there were any where he decided this is perfect the way it was, and also if you maybe could talk a little bit about some of the detail that went into these CGIs, because it wasn't just about the, changing window frames or whatever. Glenn was involved in the selection of the furniture that was going to be in, artworks and so on. I just wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about that detail, just in how that they were brought to life as close to as real life as possible.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't we all love a second shot at something that we've done in the past? I mean, as a writer, you'd probably want another shot at writing something, and I know that on projects you go, gosh, if I had a second chance, I could do that again, and I probably wouldn't have done that, or I would have insisted on this. So in a way, Glenn had that second shot because he was kind of coming back to the project, having not looked at it for maybe 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. And to see it with fresh eyes again, he's like, oh, God, I wouldn't have done that. Or actually, I could probably improve that because a later project dealt with that problem and I did that solution. So that would now apply back to that previous project. And so this is the classic example here. This is the community building up at Lightning Ridge. And the edge detail around that roof, Glenn redesigned because the drawing showed a particular detail. He said, no, it's not feathering enough. We need to, can you possibly just maybe redesign that edge? And so we sent through some more sketches and said, this is how I want that to be. It would taper from 200 down to 75, and then there'd be a rebate there. But then don't forget, we've got to lift the roof sheet up there. But if we're doing that, then the gutter's got to get returned back to that corner. So what I'll do is reticulate the gutter, and the downpipe can be incorporated. And I'm like, Glenn, we can't do the downpipe there because it's almost like we're on site and the contractor's making phone calls saying we need this detail. And we kind of had to remember that this is just kind of computer world, right? But both of us kind of couldn't help ourselves. And the edge detail here, this one's an amazing building. It's actually sort of a building inside a building, because there's the long vaulted sheds, and then over the top there's a stretched canvas, well, almost like a tensile fabric roof, which provides shade, particularly in this kind of hot, arid location. And there's an edge detail which he'd drawn in the original drawings, which was kind of okay, but not highly refined. And he said, you know what, I think we could do a better job of that one. Why don't we do the same detail I did for the M Pavilion 2 years ago, the one I did for Naomi. And then that one we used a sheet of stainless as an edge trim, so you didn't see the scallops of the stretched fabric. And that provides a beautiful, clean edge across the front and a much nicer silhouette. So yeah, let's do that one. And if we're doing that, then what we'll do is we'll rework the steel work, and then we'll use the tension ratchets here, and then what I'll probably do is weld that to that one. So if you could just, and so 16 iterations later, we've finally kind of got the detail done to that level of satisfaction that made him say, yes, this is the best possible piece of work I could do. And that's one of his catch cries is you've got to do, you cannot compromise, because a compromise, it represents the fact that you've not done something to the highest potential that you've got, and that compromise will lead to the quality of your next client. So you need to maintain that level of diligence with your detailing. And so that's a natural, it's one of his core values as a human being. So if he sees something that isn't quite right, he'll absolutely endeavour to improve it and to change it and to update it. So even some of the sketches in the book are actually some updated sketches for those little bits of details and those edges. But I think Glenn probably felt that resolved that particular project. So I think he got some satisfaction out of finishing the job really, really well. And in terms of, I think, was it any regrets? I think he mentioned, he said the one building which I think would have been terrific to have built, or the one he thinks had the best potential, was the house in Mount White. And that's the one with the long edges, and it's the sort of the fingers that radiate out into the landscape, and it's sort of up on the hill there in the bush. And I think he feels that one really could have been the one that kind of got away, because it could have been, well, in my opinion, and I've actually written this in the book, it had the potential to be his finest work, that particular house. So that's the one little, I feel it's a bit of a lost opportunity, or a little bit of a tragedy that one wasn't built. And it's interesting as well, a lot of people have said, would it be possible to build these houses? And this may be a question from burning in people's minds here tonight. Would it be possible to actually build them? What would stop you from building these houses? You've got the drawings, they all exist. And my answer would be, well, you could build them, but only for that particular site. You couldn't possibly take that design or that design idea and build it somewhere else, because then that's entirely inappropriate for that particular location. Because the way Glenn designs is, it's an architecture of response. You respond to the site, the orientation, the contours, the flora, the fauna, as he says in the intro of the book. It's all about that responding to place. So you couldn't take an idea and go and relocate it somewhere, because it would be entirely inappropriate. So yeah, I think that's probably his only regret, is that one house up at the Central Coast.
I've been very fortunate in that I've met Glenn a few times. He's quite a formidable man, as a lot of big name architects that I've met as well, but he also strikes me as an incredibly generous and humble person. And he doesn't have, when you go through this book, you know, he's written the foreword to the book. It's not a very long foreword. Doesn't seem like someone who's reflecting on their life's work and so on. Is he shy about, not so much publicity, but about sort of blowing his own trumpet, so to speak?
Yes, very definitely. Glenn, I mean, without being too much of a fanboy, Glenn is quite possibly the nicest man I've ever met in my entire life. He is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful guy. He's patient but passionate. He's a great teacher. He spends time with you. I mean, I had an experience, this would be about 12, 15 years ago. He was running a studio at UNSW and he needed some tutors for the tutorial group, and he rang me up saying, would I like to participate? And normally these phone calls would be like, what, 5 minutes or something, like, hey, yeah, it's Glenn, you want to do this, it's a project, give me a call, let me think about it, could be good. He honestly spent 45 minutes describing the project to me, what he was trying to get out of it, what the site was like, what the obligations were going to be, how he was going to teach the class. I mean, it was just, he spoke and spoke and spoke because he wanted to share all of the values that he was putting into that particular university project. And if I was going to sign up to it, I needed to understand that value set so I could participate effectively and give the students the best possible teaching outcome. And that's just a small example of how Glenn operates. As he says, he's never approached magazines or authors or publishers to have his work printed or celebrated. He's always responded to invitations. So he would never go out there to say, I want to do a book about myself, all about me, me, me. He's dead against it. He's dead against that kind of self-promotion. But if someone invites him and someone asks, and if somebody's interested, well then he's the most generous person in the world. And I was actually staggered at the amount of time we spent together. I could not have predicted the frequency with which we met, we interviewed, the number of phone calls, the catch-ups, the proofreading, the checking the facts, coming back with additional information. I mean, I'll show you my telephone later with the text message conversation, which if I scrolled it would go to the end of the building and back. It's just this fantastic long conversation because he has that sense of doing things correctly and doing things well and being generous with his time and his knowledge. And if students wrote to him and asked for particular details for his house, he'd just give them away. He'd say, absolutely, here you are. Because the more you give away, the more you get back. So that's kind of his value set. And I think that definitely came from his parents. His parents were a formidable influence on his life, particularly his father. And I think that his whole career, I realised, was built on a system of values, a value set. And that's kind of that was the lesson actually for me from this book. It was his values, which were really absolutely deep and profound and well established, and they were really the guiding lights for his life and how he treated other people. So yeah, he was a delight to work with.
I have been on the receiving end of one of those Murcutt texts. When I was working on a newspaper and Zaha Hadid passed away, we were working, and I had met her, so I was writing an obituary, and I thought, I should get a quote from Glenn, and I called him, and he kind of seemed pissed off, and he was, I'm very busy, I can't really talk now, I'll get back to you, which as a journalist you think, I'm never going to hear from this guy. And about 20 minutes later, I got this perfectly written 500-word commentary about her work and so on, which was he put thought into, and it was kind of like, we'll just run. Here's my work done for me. I think the other remarkable thing, which is not really what this book is about, but I will ask you about it, is, I mean, Glenn is a man who is in his 80s. That is an age when most people are looking towards retirement and not working anymore and so on. But you were telling me earlier that he's never been busier and is still working and has all sorts of projects, including houses on his drawing board. What do you think drives, it seems to me to be something that's very particular to architects, but what do you think drives architects to just work and work and work until they literally stop?
Wow, I guess you can't retire, can you? Because an entire compartment of your brain has been trained to do things in a particular way, and it gets as an architect, it becomes a part of your personality, and it becomes a part of your drive, and everything you do is really around that. And I guess for Glenn, I can't imagine he'd want to do anything else, actually. I think at the heart of it, if he said, look, I'm going to stop now, do nothing, I think 10 minutes later he'd go, God, this is boring, isn't it? I mean, gosh, why don't maybe I can sort of do a sketch or something. But so I guess he can't stop because we never stop as designers. And I think he'll carry on. I mean, Harry Seidler, he practiced right up to the very end of his life. I.M. Pei, very similar. Philip Johnson. I mean, the list of wonderful architects goes on and on and on because they get compelled to build upon a body of work. And because, I guess, the way that Glenn designs, he's not a one-trick pony, so he'd never do the same kind of scheme. There are certain details that work well for him and he'll kind of keep using them, but he's always looking for the specific answer for that specific site and that specific project. So if a client comes to you and says, look, I want to do a house on this particularly beautiful site or a project here, I guess his curiosity would probably get the better of him, and he'll say, oh, how would you solve that particular design problem? So I think he probably feels compelled just to keep on working because I guess he loves it so much that the revealing the problem and drawing the problem out and drawing out the solution is really what drives him. So I think he'll keep going. He's working more and more in collaboration with others. He's doing a project just in front of Manly Beach for the Royal Far West Hospital, which is an apartment project. He's doing that with Angelo Candelapis. And Angelo's got a bigger team and more firepower, but Glenn's deeply involved in that project, so they're working in collaboration together. He's worked a lot with his wife Wendy, and she's a fabulous architect. She was my tutor as well at uni. She's one of my heroes. So I guess to kind of to compensate for him getting a little bit older and maybe running out of energy a little bit, he's then working with others to help drive that ambition. And I think he's kind of planting the seeds in the future of the next generation of architects to kind of pick up the shield and the sword and to keep fighting that good fight. But no, he'll keep going to his last breath. I'm almost certain.
I might at this point see if anybody does have a question they would like to ask me. Yes, you do. Just because it's been recorded, if you ask your question, I'll then repeat it for the benefit of the camera. Sorry, would you? Yes.
This is a does he have staff, and does he delegate certain aspects of the work to his staff?
So the question is, does Glenn have staff, and does he delegate certain aspects of his work to staff, or is he still very much a one-man operation, apart from what you said previously about the collaboration?
Yeah. No, Glenn's always been, he would describe himself as a sole practitioner. So he sits in his studio in his house in Mossman, downstairs a little studio, upstairs there's the living room and the bedroom. So he works effectively from home, and he's done that, I think, most of his life. I think he had a little office in Mossman back in maybe the 60s or 70s or something, but fundamentally he's worked by himself on his own premises. If he needs some help, and I'm a good example of that, in the late 90s he was doing a lot of teaching internationally, and I was his student the previous year, and I really wanted to work with him. I thought, gosh, I've graduated now, what will be my pipe dream? I'd love to work with Glenn, but I knew he didn't take people on, he didn't take on employees. But I lived down the road from him, and so I thought I'll write him a little letter and I'll sort of pop it in the letterbox and see what happens. I wrote, "Dear Glenn, if anything comes up, if you need some assistance with something, please let me know, I'm very keen. Regards, Nick." And I thought nothing of it. And I think it was about a week later he left a message on my answer machine, so we're talking 90s now, and it was like, "Hi, it's Glenn Murcutt here. Look, as you know, I don't normally take any staff on." And I'm like, I was a bit crestfallen. I was like, "Oh, it's nice of him to ring and say no." But I'm going to Austin in Texas in a week and a half. I've got a project down in Kangaroo Valley which needs some assistance. Would you like to help? And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was over the moon. So I worked on that project for a couple of months. Glenn was away, Wendy assisted, and I got those projects done. On other occasions, he's taken on an assistant or two. I mean, for the Moonlight Head project, Peter and Paul Georgiadis worked with him on that one because it was such a big job. He actually committed to doing some of the drawings on the computer, and I think he was talked into doing that, and the efficiencies of doing that by the Georgiadis brothers. So they assisted on that project only. And so if you help Glenn, you would work on a particular task, on a particular project to meet a particular need and a particular time frame. But he has also worked in collaboration with others before, so he'll work with another architect or another office on occasion. I know he's worked with Bates Smart, I think, on the house down in Kew in Victoria. He's certainly worked with Wendy, he's worked with Alex Sands, I think again back in the 80s and 90s. So he'll bring people on, I think, when he's a bit short of capacity, but not as employees. So he's not responsible for them for the next project, but really to help him on that one particular project. And then more recently working with Angelo, again, in association. But he described himself as a sole practitioner, and that gives him that freedom, the freedom to pick and choose what he wants to do and when he wants to do it, which is, it's the hard way of doing that job, by the way.
Do you have any more questions by any chance? Do you think, Nick, it's possible to work as an architect these days, come out of university and be a Glenn Murcutt, be a sole practitioner, and not, I mean, obviously it's possible to be a sole practitioner, but to have a successful career?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think the world, this is my perspective. I'm 53, and I know you can't believe it, but I am 53. My feeling is that as the years have gone on, things have gotten harder and harder and harder, and it's all for the right reasons. But when Glenn started out, I think there was a much wider sense of design freedom to really start to evolve the way he works, and he was able to take the way he worked to the next level, which kind of made him immune to the vagaries of the planning system, of kind of all the stuff that we have to deal with, rules, regulations, codes, Australian standards, all the stuff that kind of wears you down and down and down and down and down. We've got a thing now called the Apartment Design Guide, which is a design guide, and it started life as a guide. It was a state government document, and it was really to solve a lot of the poorly built apartment buildings which didn't provide enough kind of natural light. So it was done for all the right reasons. And when it was first introduced, we were told it's just a guide. It's a guide for councils to use to assess. Look, just relax, it's just a guide. Now it's not a guide, because every council's going, oh, does it comply with ADG? And we're going, well, it's a guide. No, we want full compliance with the ADG. So that balcony's got to be 12.2 square metres minimum. That needs to be there, and you've got to have, all these kind of rules and regs have crept in to the point where you're going, I can't actually do anything original on this project now. It is impossible. And as time has gone on, you start to see projects which kind of solve these problems, and we've now ended up with effectively a template that you kind of have to follow so you can kind of get the thing approved. And rules and regs are also tightened up in terms of things like, say, basics. Basics is the energy rating tool that you have to comply with when you design a house now. And again, it all starts for the right reasons, and it's all wonderful, and we're all trying to save energy, reduce carbon. But what it assumes is that you've actually got a totally sealed up house, and it assumes that you've got air conditioning, and it assumes that you don't have any real eaves, and it assumes that you're in Western Sydney, and it's kind of, you're kind of building on Mars, right? So it means that you kind of get penalised for having openable windows or breezeways, and all these wonderful passive design elements kind of get, I guess, compromised by meeting hugely high, ambitious insulation rates, which actually you kind of don't need if you have a different philosophy. So it's very hard in Australia, particularly in New South Wales, to become, I think, an original, inspirational architect when we are really, I think, crowded in with more and more and more legislation. So that's the big frustration I have. I kind of feel though as architects we should be exempt from all that because we're very trained. You know, we've done 6 or 7 years at university. Our job is to design wonderful, beautiful buildings. So those rules could apply maybe to developers or volume house builders or apartment developers, and that'd be fine. But actually we need some space to do great work. So I mean, there are some good young architects out there, but they're not sole practitioners anymore. I can't think of one actually who's working by themselves. There's no one who's going to replicate, I think, what Glenn did, because these days you need to collaborate because things are so complicated. You've got to have good CAD guys. You've got to have people who can do CGI. We've got AI, which is starting to arrive now, and people who are good at doing rules and regs, blah blah blah. So you do need a wider team of people just to tick all those compliance boxes. And Glenn's finding it harder and harder, and if you ask him, he'll start complaining about all these rules and regs because it drives him nuts. But I think he sort of somehow gets away with it because he's a Pritzker Prize winner, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a question here.
So the question was, does Glenn live in, does the house Glenn lives in, was it designed by Glenn? I hope the answer to that is yes. And also, does he do work for community buildings that are not, very expensive multi-million-dollar buildings?
Yeah. For a long time, Glenn lived in a semi-detached house in Mossman, which he didn't design. It was a nice sort of little old Federation thing. And like every or like a cobbler, cobbler's shoes are never fixed, right? So you never have time for your own house. I've designed my own house 4 times and haven't swung a hammer yet because life gets in the way. So doing your own place, you really need to do it. So he finally did do that to his semi in Mossman. And he kept the front. It's very simple. There's a neighbour right next door. It's like sharing a party wall. It's very, very modest. There's no harbour views, it's just sort of on Raglan Street, just sort of tucked away behind the shops there. But at the back there's this most wonderful extension, this long living room which goes out. There's this big sort of steel framed window which sort of leaps up towards the sky to capture these kind of handfuls of view and fresh air. And these beautiful pivot windows which are on these big stainless steel sticks. And there's a long galley kitchen, well not long actually, it's very short, it's a very small kitchen. But it's really just a space, and in the back corner there's a slit window just to kind of provide a balance of light. And then there's the sort of the door, and behind that door there's the stairs down to his studio, and no one's allowed down there. Despite my best efforts, I've never been able to get down there. And that's where his studio is. And it's just a room. So he does live in his own house, and it's very beautiful. And the upstairs bedrooms have these remarkable little skylights again, which sort of poke out of the roof to capture northern light. So, but he does also own 2 other of his works. The house up at the Simpson Lee house, he did for some clients. He now owns that house. That's right. So that was left to him as the designer, and that's been heritage listed recently. It's I think his finest work, built work. It's an absolutely beautiful house. So now he has that one, and also the Marie Short house up at Kempsey is now, he bought that from the Short family and did some extensions and some amendments to that one. And I have been to that house, it's very beautiful. That's just in the middle of a rolling field. So he has 3 projects which he has designed, but his main house is a very modest affair, just sort of in regular suburbia really.
And just the other part of the question was about community work.
Oh, community houses. Glenn has done a few projects like that. I guess there's the community building here, which was, this was the one with the stretched canopy roof. That was a community building for the council up at Lightning Ridge, and that was for a little medical centre. I think it was childcare. There was, I think, medical suites, a little art gallery. So that was a very simple, lovely community project, which I think he did for a modest fee. He also did the Murcutt Alderton house up in Arnhem Land, which he did, I think, either for no fee. I think he may have done that for nothing, which was a prototype template for Indigenous housing up in the top end. And that was a beautiful building again, fully operable. It floated above the land, up above the floodplain, a lovely long eaves overhang roof. And I think he dedicated his fee to that project to get it realised. And it was all prefabricated in Gosford and then trucked up to the top end and reassembled. And I think that his engineer, Jim Taylor, also dedicated his fee to that one to get that one realised. And he did an unbuilt project, which was on the long list actually, which was the Aboriginal Alcoholic Rehabilitation Centre up in Kempsey. I'm not sure why that didn't go ahead, but that was also, I think, a community-minded project. But on the whole, he's, and because again he's got a long list of clients, I guess there's limited opportunities to do work like that. But I think every project needs to have, you know, a higher purpose, I think, ultimately.
We probably have time for one more question. Yes.
I'm interested in the decision process to take a role on or a job on. So I'm sure there's plenty of people who love a design house. So what is the focus points around deciding to go forward with a project with a client? Is it the landscape or the site? Is it the client and the difficulty with the client? What is that process?
So the question is about, in a nutshell, what makes Glenn say yes to taking on a project. I mean, obviously there are a lot of people who would want a Glenn Murcutt designed house and have the means for it. What is the criteria that he puts over it for him to say yes?
I think he needs to be convinced that they have overlapping shared ambitions for the project. What he would tend to do, I think, it was arrange to meet with them and say, look, I'll come and have a meeting with you. We'll talk about the project, and you can tell me, you know, where it is, what you want to achieve, etc., etc. So he'll meet with them, and generally, I think in that first meeting, he'll get a sense of whether this is a good match or not. And I think he will then probably very honestly say, look, I think my waiting list is 3 or 4 years long for a start. So if you can wait, well then that's something you'll have to do for me to do this project. And that, I think, immediately probably cuts out half of the inquiries potentially. If he feels in his heart of hearts that a project may not be compatible with this particular client, I think what he'll do is probably suggest someone else and say, look, I really feel that this project might be better done by another architect who might have more affinity with this particular type of project, or have got more experience with it, and then he may offer to make an introduction to somebody. And he's done that plenty of times in his career. He's quite often referred young architects, young up-and-coming architects for projects. And that might be a way through it. But he'll also kind of, I think, go through their house as well when he visits, just to sort of check out their furniture, check out the art collection, and as he says, he'd see if there are any ducks flying on the wall, you know, to kind of to see what are these people all about, and he'll very quickly get a sense of whether they've engaged him for the right reasons or they've engaged him for the wrong reasons. And there are probably people out there who probably want a trophy Murcutt house, and you probably pick that up immediately. And others who are quite subtle, and they've approached him in a subtle way, and they've done it with a simple introduction. They haven't done the big kind of power play, kind of I'm rich and important. You know, he'll probably suss out kind of what works and what doesn't. And I'm sure there's a list of projects he would love to do, but he's never been approached to do. But projects have come from the weirdest places. I mean, one of the other unbuilt projects was a monk's facility down in Wollongong. And he's done all the sketches for that one, but again, it hasn't gone ahead. But that was an approach through someone who met someone who asked about someone, and then kind of this very soft arrival. And also the mosque down in Victoria as well, the most kind of unexpected invitation to do a mosque but they reached out in the most kind of sensitive and interesting way that Glenn felt compelled to do it, because again it was done for that higher purpose. So yeah, I guess the answer is there has to be that simpatico, I think, with the client and an understanding of those shared values.
Can you describe the light? Can you describe the light in the mosque? Because I believe that's one of the fantastic things about it, the way that you use the light, the
Yeah.
glasses.
Oh, can you briefly describe the mosque in Victoria and how the
Yeah.
light comes through the coloured glass?
Sure. That's a wonderful question, because there's a wonderful answer. Glenn did a scheme for the mosque and he was kind of happy with it, various roof forms, kind of working it through, and he kind of got a scheme together. And he tells a story. He said, Wendy looked over his shoulder and said, "You can do better than that." So he was like, "Oh, geez, okay, well, if I'm kind of, my harshest critic is not happy, well then clearly I've not quite got there, right?" So he kind of went back to the drawing board and started to look at maybe bringing in some geometries and some motifs which were more relative, I think, to Islamic architecture. And that was kind of the idea of these triangles. So what emerged then was the idea of taking the triangular structure and extruding up these skylights, and there must be 50 or 60 of them, which all pop up above the roof. It's a similar volume to this, really. And each one of those skylights then looks in a particular direction. So some are looking east, some are looking west. And then the internal colours of those are then painted in different colours, different primary colours, the greens, reds and blues, which were evocative, I guess, of the old lapis lazuli kind of decorations of wonderful Islamic art and buildings. And then that started to draw in the ideas of colour, time of day, etc. And I think the scheme evolved then out of that big idea of these lanterns. And on the outside of the building, they're actually, I think, plated in gold leaf. It may not be real gold, but they're certainly gold coloured. And so there's this beautiful kind of roofscape of these skylights which pop up. But the internal experience is all about light. And I guess it's very similar to the Le Corbusier chapel, Longchamp, in France. So yeah, there's all sorts of kind of strands being drawn together, but he was challenged by Wendy to do a better job.
We have to wrap up. I think we could stay here all night talking, but Nick will be hanging around and you can come and ask him a question directly, and he will also be signing books. I think this is a terrific book. I have to say, a lot of architecture books come across my desk. Not often do they have nothing on the cover. And I must say I was intrigued, and I don't know if this was intentional, but I think one of the most interesting things about it is it's got nothing on the cover. It says Unbuilt, and in my mind I thought, oh, this is going to be drawings and plans and so on. I think it's a book that could only have been done now, because the way these renderings have done is, it is really hard to look through this book and you do think that they are real buildings, the way the light has been incorporated into the image and stuff. So I think it's an incredible achievement. And I think, again, it's only something that could have been done now. So congratulations on this book. I think it's going to do incredibly well. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts this evening. Everybody could please thank Nick Sissons.